The confrontation begins long before anyone realizes what is truly happening. It starts with the soft, almost unnoticed squeak of a cleaning cart wheel rolling across the polished floor, its rhythm matching the steady pace of a janitor who has worked this same building for nearly a decade. He knows every corner, every echo, every late-night hum of the ventilation system. What he doesn't know is why two members of security suddenly begin following him. Silent at first, then firm, then uncomfortably close. To him, the shift had been routine. He had just finished cleaning the upper conference suites, a task he always took pride in because the high-profile clients who used those rooms rarely noticed the person who kept the place spotless. He never sought recognition. He simply valued doing a job well. But tonight felt different. The moment the elevator doors slid open and he saw the stern faces of the security guards waiting for him in the hallway, their eyes fixed on him with a seriousness he couldn't understand. He felt the air change, thicken, as though he had stepped into a space where he no longer belonged. The guards didn't start with questions. Instead, they began with instructions, short, clipped, and delivered with an unmistakable edge. "Sir, we need you to come with us." The janitor's heart thudded as he tried to understand. He asked what the issue was, but the answer was simply repeated, louder, as if volume alone would justify the demand. The hallway lights seemed harsher suddenly, casting sharp angles over the gray walls and making him feel exposed, as though the building he knew so well had turned against him. Employees walking past slowed, sensing something out of place. Their eyes flicked between the janitor and the guards. They didn't know what was happening, but the discomfort was palpable. Whispers began to ripple through the corridor, each one carrying assumptions that tightened the janitor's chest. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. He wasn't used to being treated as a threat. His mind raced through possibilities. Had he unknowingly broken a rule? Was there some misunderstanding with the cleaning logs? Or was this something much deeper, something he couldn't yet imagine? As the guards stepped closer, their posture stiffening, the janitor felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. He raised his hands slightly in the universal sign of calm, hoping to diffuse whatever tension the guards perceived, but instead of relaxing, they exchanged a glance that only heightened the intensity. In that moment, the janitor realized he was no longer being treated as a worker, he was being treated as a problem, someone to remove quickly, someone whose voice didn't matter. He swallowed hard, trying to control the rising tide of emotion. The cleaning cart, still sitting beside him, suddenly felt like a symbol of everything he had worked for. Consistency, reliability, purpose. And now it stood as silent witness to a confrontation he didn't understand. The janitor knew that whatever was happening would not be easy to undo. The hallway, once familiar and predictable, now felt like the stage of a conflict that had ignited without warning, leaving him confused, embarrassed, and alone in the middle of a growing spotlight. A suspenseful mid-hallway standoff captures everyone's attention. The tension in the hallway deepened as the standoff solidified into something unmistakable, an emotionally charged moment where time seemed to slow. People who had once passed by without noticing the janitor now found themselves unable to look away. The hallway, usually a busy artery of corporate movement, transformed into a zone of uneasy stillness. Every footstep softened into silence, every conversation faded, and every eye locked onto the unfolding confrontation. The guards had taken firm positions on either side of the janitor, their tone cold and administrative as they repeated their demand. Their stance left no room for compromise. The janitor's breath hitched, chest tightening as he tried again to ask what he had done wrong. His voice trembled, not from guilt, but from the fear of being misunderstood, of being accused without explanation. It was a raw fear, the kind that clings to a person who has always tried to do right. Employees standing nearby exchanged uncertain glances. This was not the kind of drama they expected to encounter on a workday. Some took half steps closer, drawn by concern or curiosity, while others hung back, unsure whether they should intervene. Someone whispered, "What's going on?" Another responded, "I don't know, but it doesn't look good." The uncertainty fed the atmosphere, making the standoff even more electric. The janitor's shoulders tightened as he felt himself being boxed in. His mind searched desperately for clarity. He had no idea why security had targeted him, but the sudden shift in how people viewed him, The way some eyes softened with sympathy while others hardened with suspicion made him feel as though the ground had moved beneath him. He had become a spectacle, not by choice, but by circumstance. One of the guards gestured toward the exit down the long, echoing hallway. "Let's go," he commanded. But the janitor stood his ground, unable to make his feet obey. Not out of rebellion, but because leaving without understanding felt like surrendering to something unjust. The guard's impatience became visible in the jerk of his jaw, the tightening grip on his radio. The air thrummed with the potential for escalation. The gathered onlookers felt it too. A few employees shifted uneasily, sensing that the janitor's quiet demeanor didn't match the severity of the security team's response. One person raised a tentative hand and asked, "Is everything okay here?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, amplifying the suspense. For the janitor, every second felt like a test of whether he would be believed or dismissed, whether his years of dedication meant anything at all. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions, a narrow corridor of fluorescent lights and tension that held everyone captive. The standoff, frozen and uncomfortable, captured not just attention but emotion, leaving everyone unsure of what would happen next. The tension in the hallway had reached a near breaking point when a new presence cut through the crackling atmosphere with unexpected force. The building owner, known for walking the halls only during high-level inspections or major emergencies, turned the corner with a purposeful stride. His appearance alone shifted the energy. Employees straightened instinctively, the security guards stiffened, and the janitor felt a flicker of hope he didn't yet dare trust. The owner wasn't the kind of person who blended into a crowd. His posture carried gravity, and his expression sharpened as soon as he noticed the cluster of people gathered mid-hallway, their faces tight with concern. He did not need to ask what was happening to sense that something had gone wrong. The air itself seemed different, charged, uneasy, heavy with the kind of silence that signals an imbalance of power. The owner's eyes moved quickly, scanning the janitor, the guards, the abandoned cleaning cart, and the employees watching from both sides of the corridor. His gaze lingered on the janitor long enough for the man to feel seen, truly seen, for the first time since the confrontation began. The guards were the first to speak, stepping forward with rigid professionalism. One began explaining that there had been a report, vague, unclear, and delivered in hurried fragments, that implied the janitor might be involved in something suspicious. But as the guard spoke, the owner's expression did not match the gravity the security team expected. Instead, he looked perplexed, then unconvinced, then unmistakably troubled. The janitor watched carefully, holding his breath without meaning to, waiting for any sign that the owner believed the accusations or that he might intervene on his behalf. Employees who had remained on the sidelines now shifted, leaning closer to catch the reaction of the person who held ultimate authority in the building. His reputation for fairness and for rarely acting without knowing every detail gave the crowd reason to believe something significant was about to happen. The owner's footsteps echoed as he advanced into the heart of the confrontation, his shoes clicking sharply against the floor. He stopped beside the janitor, his presence imposing but not intimidating, and looked directly at him. There was recognition in that look, a realization that this man was not some passing worker but someone who had been part of the building's daily pulse for years. Someone who had quietly ensured cleanliness, order, and stability while others passed by without noticing. The owner addressed the janitor calmly, asking if he understood why he was being approached. The janitor shook his head, unable to hide the tremor in his voice as he explained he had no idea what was happening. Something in that simple, honest response deepened the owner's concern. Turning back to the guards, the owner demanded more specifics, exactly what report, who filed it, what evidence there was. The guards faltered, their earlier confidence dissolving as they struggled to articulate the vague chain of communication that had sparked the confrontation. It became clear that the report had been based on assumption rather than fact, suspicion rather than verification. The owner's jaw tightened subtly, the only visible sign of his growing frustration. The employees watching sensed the shift, the guards sensed it too. The janitor, feeling the weight of the moment pressing against him from all sides, found himself fighting a swirl of fear and relief. The owner's presence had broken the momentum of an escalating situation, but the outcome was still uncertain. The hallway, charged only moments before with one kind of tension, now simmered with another. the anticipation of what the owner would say or do next. The janitor felt an unfamiliar mixture of vulnerability and hope, knowing the next words spoken could redefine everything that had unfolded. A heart-stopping intervention that changes everything. The owner's intervention began not with anger but with a kind of clarity that cut through the confusion like a blade. He stepped directly between the janitor and the guards, an action that drew audible breaths from the employees standing nearby. It was a move that changed the geometry of the confrontation, no longer janitor versus security, but owner versus the assumptions that had fueled the misunderstanding. The guards hesitated, unsure whether to take a step back or stand their ground, but the owner's presence left little room for debate. He asked the guards again to present concrete reasons for escorting the janitor out of the building, his tone firmer now, carrying a weight that demanded precision. The guards exchanged nervous glances, their earlier certainty dissolving under the scrutiny. As they fumbled for an explanation, the owner's expression grew more resolute, each passing second reinforcing the sense that the situation had been mishandled from the beginning. The janitor watched, his heartbeat loud in his ears, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear this time, but from the emotional whiplash of being defended by someone he had only ever seen from afar. The owner turned to the janitor, softening his tone just enough to convey respect. He asked if anything unusual had occurred during the shift. The janitor explained everything he had done, methodically, humbly, with the same quiet dedication he brought to his work every night. There was nothing suspicious in his routine, nothing that warranted the sudden aggression he had faced. As he spoke, the employees around him nodded subtly, recognizing the sincerity in his voice. The owner listened carefully, and with each detail the janitor shared, the misunderstanding became painfully clear. Then the owner redirected his attention to the guards, his voice gaining a sharper edge. He reminded them of protocol, that accusations required evidence, that every employee deserved respect, that assumptions had no place in a building built on trust and professionalism. The guards stood rigidly, absorbing the reprimand without protest. The owner's words held them accountable not through humiliation, but through an unmistakable call for responsibility. For the employees watching, the moment carried a powerful emotional charge. They saw the janitor's posture shift, shoulders easing, breath steadying, as he realized he was no longer alone on the opposite side of authority. They saw the owner's protective stance as more than a gesture of leadership. It was an affirmation of the janitor's humanity, his effort, and his value. And they felt the weight of the moment because it revealed something rare, a person in power stepping forward not to dominate, but to correct, to restore balance, to acknowledge a wrong before it spiraled into something far more damaging. As the tension in the hallway slowly unraveled, the owner's intervention continued to ripple through everyone present. The silence that followed wasn't hostile or fearful, it was reflective, the kind of quiet that appears when people witness something unexpected yet deeply necessary. The janitor breathed more steadily now, still shaken but no longer drowning in uncertainty. The owner remained by his side, a grounding presence that shifted the entire course of the confrontation. The moment the misunderstanding became evident, an emotional tide began to swell through the hallway. Slowly at first, then with a momentum that could not be ignored. The janitor, a man whose loyalty had been woven quietly into the fabric of the building for years, stood at the center of the scene, absorbing the weight of being wrongly accused. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths as the reality settled. He had been targeted not because of anything he had done, but because someone, somewhere, had misunderstood or miscommunicated, and now he was left to carry the consequences. His co-workers, many of whom had passed him hundreds of times without learning his name, found themselves unexpectedly drawn into the moment. Faces softened, eyes widened. Something inside the crowd shifted from simple curiosity to deep empathy. It wasn't just the accusation that struck them. It was the look on the janitor's face, a look that revealed a lifetime of working quietly, following rules, staying humble, and rarely asking for anything. To see someone like that cornered unfairly stirred something raw and powerful in the observers. The janitor himself seemed caught between disbelief and grief. He had always believed that doing good work, staying honest, and keeping to himself would shield him from trouble. But now he stood accused without evidence, surrounded by people whose perceptions of him teetered between sympathy and uncertainty. He tried to steady himself, but the tremble in his hands betrayed him. He wasn't afraid of punishment. He was afraid of being misunderstood. Afraid that his character, something he had built over years of diligence, could be dismantled in seconds by someone else's assumption. As the crowd absorbed the owner's questions and the guard's unsteady explanations, emotional reactions continued to grow. One employee, who often stayed late and saw the janitor cleaning the office floors long after everyone else had gone home, felt a lump rise in her throat. She had always admired his quiet discipline. Now she felt protective, even guilty, for never acknowledging it before. Another worker, usually detached from workplace drama, found himself clenching his jaw in frustration. He knew what it felt like to be overlooked, undervalued, or treated as disposable. Seeing the janitor face that same treatment ignited a personal sense of indignation. The janitor didn't notice all the faces watching him, but he felt the pressure of their attention. He felt exposed in a way he had never experienced. His work had always been invisible, a good kind of invisible, the quiet kind that helps a building run smoothly without drawing attention. Now that invisibility had turned against him, leaving him defenseless in a moment when he desperately needed to be seen clearly. His voice wavered when he tried to explain himself, the words emerging, fragile but honest. He spoke of where he had been, what he had cleaned, what he had carried in his cart. Simple truths, spoken with a vulnerability that cut through the room. The owner listened with an expression that grew more serious by the second. He could see the emotional unraveling taking place in the janitor, the fear, the confusion, the hurt pride, and he could see the crowd absorbing all of it. The wrongful accusation had done more than spark a procedural misstep. It had bruised the spirit of someone who had given years of quiet, reliable service. The guards, still standing stiffly, seemed to feel the crowd's shift as well. Their earlier authority now felt brittle, fragile under the weight of so many watching eyes. They weren't villains, but they had acted hastily, relying on hearsay rather than verification. Now they stood as the embodiment of misunderstanding, facing a moral discomfort they had not anticipated. The janitor's internal world continued to churn. He felt anger flare for a moment, sharp, brief, unfamiliar. He wasn't an angry person by nature. Life had taught him patience far more often than bitterness. But the idea that he could be pushed toward a door he had unlocked every night for years without being given the chance to explain was something he could not fully reconcile. And yet anger gave way quickly to sadness. A heavy sadness that settled into his posture and drained his strength. Employees felt that sadness, and it pulled at them. Many of them had never thought deeply about the janitors who moved quietly through the building, maintaining order behind the scenes. But in this moment, with emotions laid bare, they felt a collective sense of responsibility, not for what had happened, but for how little they had noticed before. The janitor had always been part of their environment, but not part of their awareness. Now he had become the focal point of an emotional reckoning none of them expected. The owner, observing the emotional landscape shift, understood the importance of what was happening. This wasn't just a procedural failure or a communication error. It was a moment of truth for everyone present, a moment that revealed how easily a loyal worker could be cast into suspicion simply because he lacked visibility, power, or a loud voice. The emotional reaction in the hallway was not just sympathy, it was recognition. Recognition of a man's dignity, his contribution, his humanity. Recognition of a wrong that needed to be addressed, not quietly but firmly, in front of all who had witnessed it. And the janitor, though shaken, felt something new beneath the chaos of his emotions, the faint, trembling sense that maybe he was not entirely alone after all. Authority misused, security actions raise immediate questions. The shift from emotional sympathy to pointed scrutiny came swiftly. Once the owner's questions began exposing the shaky foundation on which the guard's assumptions had been built, the mood in the hallway changed again. What had first been confusion and tension, then empathy, now evolved into concern. Deep concern about how easily authority had been misapplied. The guard's actions, once seen as routine procedure, now stood under a harsh spotlight. Employees who had initially hesitated to involve themselves began turning their attention fully toward the security team. Their eyes narrowed, their arms folded, their expressions sharpened with growing unease. They weren't angry merely for the janitor. They were unsettled because the situation revealed a crack in the system, a reminder that authority, when exercised without verification, could become a weapon instead of a safeguard. The owner's voice, calm yet unmistakably authoritative, commanded the space. He asked the guards again to outline the sequence of events that led them to confront the janitor. Their responses were vague, scattered phrases like, "We heard," "Someone reported," "It was suggested," and "We were told to check." None of these statements carried substance. None pointed to actual evidence. The crowd noticed. One employee whispered to another, "They didn't even verify anything?" Another muttered, "This could have happened to anyone." These quiet comments built a collective tension that rose like a growing tide. The guards, now acutely aware that their authority was being questioned, shifted uneasily. Their earlier confidence had evaporated. The owner's questions grew more specific. Who had made the report? What exactly had been claimed? Why had they escalated so quickly? Why had no one attempted to speak with the janitor before treating him like a threat? Each question peeled back another layer of the flawed process that had led to this confrontation. The guards struggled to respond, and the hallway grew colder with every passing second. Their postures stiffened, but not from authority, from discomfort. They weren't accustomed to being questioned, especially not in front of employees, and certainly not by the owner himself. Their silence spoke louder than their attempts to justify themselves. The janitor watched the exchange with mixed emotions. Part of him felt vindicated, validated by the owner's insistence on answers. Another part of him felt deeply unsettled. It was difficult to watch the guards, who were supposed to protect the building, struggle to explain actions that had caused him so much distress. Yet the broader implication, how quickly authority could turn against someone without reason, lingered heavily in his mind. Employees around them reflected the same concern. They began to question not just the guards' decisions, but the protocols that allowed such decisions to unfold unchecked. It became clear that a misunderstanding wasn't just an isolated mistake. It was evidence of a system that needed re-examination. The owner recognized that as well. His gaze hardened, not out of anger, but out of responsibility. The misuse of authority, intentional or not, required correction. It required accountability. It required a reminder that every employee in the building, regardless of position, deserved fairness and respect. The janitor, standing in the center of this dawning realization, felt a new emotion rising, one he did not expect. Relief. Not relief that everything was resolved, not relief that the confrontation was ending, but relief that the truth was finally visible to everyone around him, that the weight he had carried alone was now shared, understood, acknowledged. The hallway, still humming with tension, grew quieter as the janitor's history slowly surfaced, not through dramatic revelation, but through the subtle details that finally found a voice. For years he had arrived before dawn, long before the building came alive, a routine shaped not just by duty but by necessity. He had taken the job to support his family during a difficult season, promising himself he would never let hardship define him. Co-workers knew only the surface, the man who pushed the cart, who nodded politely, who cleaned thoroughly without complaint. But beneath that quiet exterior lived a person who had weathered loss, worked double shifts, and sacrificed opportunities so others in his life could pursue theirs. His hands, calloused from years of labor, carried stories no one asked about. His silence wasn't detachment, it was resilience, a learned habit of enduring without expecting recognition. As people around him watched, they began to understand that the man standing before them wasn't insignificant background staff. He was someone who had held up the unseen corners of their world far longer than they realized. The owner defends the janitor, shifting the power balance. When the owner stepped closer, positioning himself between the janitor and the guards, the balance in the hallway shifted with undeniable force. He spoke not with anger but with conviction, making it clear that the janitor was not to be treated as disposable. His voice carried a steadiness that redirected every gaze, grounding the moment with authority rooted in principle rather than intimidation. The guard stepped back slightly, their earlier certainty dissolving as the owner questioned each step of their decision-making. Employees felt a shift too. The fear in the janitor's posture softened just enough for his shoulders to lower. The owner's stance made one thing unmistakable: respect was not optional, and assumptions would not override dignity. The janitor, who moments earlier had stood isolated, now found himself shielded by the highest authority in the building, altering not just the dynamic of the confrontation, but the way everyone saw him moving forward. The hallway felt different the moment the janitor finally spoke directly to the owner, his voice quiet but steady, carrying the weight of years spent unnoticed. He didn't blame anyone, he simply described how it felt to be treated as though his presence was suspicious rather than essential. The owner listened with genuine attention, and the sincerity in the janitor's words struck those watching with unexpected force. It wasn't just a conversation. It was a moment that revealed how easily a loyal worker could be overlooked, how quickly assumptions could overshadow truth, and how deeply injustice could wound someone who rarely asked for anything. Security team faces unexpected consequences for overreach. When the owner turned to the security team, the room seemed to tense again. His questions were measured but firm, forcing the guards to confront the gaps in their judgment. Their earlier certainty vanished as they realized how their actions had spiraled without proper verification. Employees exchanged uneasy glances, understanding that this wasn't simply a correction, it was accountability. The consequences the guards now faced underscored a clear message: authority must be exercised with care, and every employee's dignity mattered. Therefore, when the immediate tension finally began to ease, the janitor found himself standing in a space that felt strangely new, as though the hallway he had walked through countless times had been transformed by everything that had just unfolded. The guards had stepped back, the employees were quietly processing what they had witnessed, and the owner remained nearby, steady and composed. In that transformed silence, the janitor felt a rush of emotion he wasn't prepared for. He had expected fear, maybe continued humiliation, perhaps even anger, but what rose to the surface instead was gratitude, unexpected and overwhelming. It wasn't gratitude for being saved, nor was it the kind that comes from relief alone. It was gratitude for being acknowledged, truly acknowledged, for the first time in as long as he could remember. For years he had been a quiet presence in the building, a figure who existed on the periphery of everyone else's daily routines. He swept floors, emptied trash bins, sanitized surfaces, and kept the environment running smoothly. Yet few ever paused to wonder about the person doing the work. His contributions were essential but invisible, valued only when something went wrong. But now, after being thrust unwillingly into the center of attention, he found himself looked at with a different kind of awareness. The owner had listened, employees had witnessed, the truth had been heard, not dismissed. And in that recognition, there was a profound sense of dignity restored. His voice, soft, steady, often overlooked, had finally mattered. When he turned to the owner, the words did not come easily. His throat tightened, his hands trembled slightly, and emotion pressed against his chest. He wasn't someone who expressed himself publicly. He wasn't used to being the focus of so many eyes. But the need to speak, to say something sincere, pushed forward. His voice cracked at the first word, catching him off guard, but he continued anyway. He thanked the owner not for intervening as a superior, but for stepping forward as a person who understood fairness. He thanked him for seeing what others had missed, for recognizing that behind the uniform was someone who cared deeply about the work he did. The employees around them shifted subtly, as though absorbing the emotional resonance of his gratitude. Some swallowed hard, feeling their own responses ripple beneath the surface. A few looked down, quietly reflecting on how many times they had passed the janitor without offering so much as a greeting. The simple act of him expressing heartfelt thanks made the moment larger than the confrontation itself. It illuminated a truth that many had not realized they had forgotten, that kindness, integrity, and loyalty deserved acknowledgement, no matter where they came from. The janitor's gratitude extended beyond the owner. He glanced toward the employees who had watched with concern, offering them a faint but genuine smile. It held a message deeper than words. He saw their empathy, felt their support, and appreciated it more than they knew. The emotional transparency of that smile created a ripple effect through the hallway. People felt something tighten in their chests, a mixture of remorse for not noticing sooner and relief that the moment had led to clarity rather than further harm. Even the guards, though chastened by the owner's earlier questions, seemed moved in a quiet, unspoken way. Their positions required them to maintain composure, but the subtle softening around their eyes revealed the impact of witnessing the janitor's vulnerability. They had expected defensiveness, maybe anger, but not gratitude. Never that. It humbled them not in a way that diminished their roles, but in a way that reminded them of the human beings behind every interaction they were tasked to handle. The janitor's gratitude wasn't theatrical, nor was it inflated. It was honest, steady, and deeply human, and because of that it resonated with everyone who heard it. It wasn't simply a polite gesture, it was a reflection of resilience. He had endured misunderstanding with grace, faced public scrutiny with humility, and now stood in this hallway with his head held a little higher, not because he sought validation, but because he had finally been granted the respect he had earned many times over. This single moment, quiet yet emotionally potent, left viewers, both in the hallway and in the minds of those who would later recount the story, moved in ways they didn't expect. It served as a reminder that gratitude, when expressed sincerely, carries the power to shift perspectives, soften hearts, and bring people closer to understanding one another. And though the confrontation had been born from a painful misunderstanding, the gratitude that followed revealed the strength of character behind the man who had faced it. A redemption-filled ending that echoes long after the scene ends. As the tension dissolved and the normal rhythm of the building slowly returned, the aftermath of the confrontation began to take shape, not in loud announcements or sweeping gestures, but in the subtle, meaningful changes that lingered in the hearts of everyone who witnessed the incident. The janitor, still processing everything, felt a strange mix of exhaustion and renewal. Something inside him had shifted. A part of him that had long grown accustomed to invisibility now felt seen, valued, and quietly redeemed. The owner, thoughtful and deliberate, stayed near long enough to ensure the situation had truly settled. His presence wasn't just about ending the conflict. It was about reshaping what the building stood for. He understood that workplaces are not defined only by policies or systems, but by how people treat one another when the unexpected happens. He knew the confrontation had revealed cracks in communication and assumptions that could no longer be ignored, but he also recognized the opportunity that had emerged. A chance to rebuild trust, strengthen fairness, and reaffirm dignity throughout every corner of the building. Employees carried the moment with them as they returned to their desks. Conversations whispered through cubicles and break rooms, not gossip, but reflection. Many found themselves rethinking the way they viewed people who worked behind the scenes. They recalled moments when they had hurried past the janitor without noticing him, absorbed in their own routines. Now that same man stood in their memory with a new presence, a reminder of humility, dedication, and the humanity that existed in even the quietest roles. The security team, though shaken, also found themselves changed. The owner's firm questions had served as more than reprimand. They were a call to improve, to ensure assumptions never again outweighed due diligence. The guards privately committed to being more attentive, more communicative, and more mindful of how their authority affected the people around them. Their redemption wasn't marked by forgiveness from others, but by their own resolution to be better. They had been humbled, and in that humility, growth had begun. For the janitor, however, the redemption was deeply personal. As he pushed his cleaning cart back down the hallway, his steps felt different. Not lighter, exactly, but more grounded, more assured. He had always taken pride in his work, but now he carried something new with him, the understanding that others recognized his value too. The moment stayed with him, not as a badge of victimhood, but as proof that his quiet strength mattered. He no longer felt invisible. Over the following days, small gestures reinforced the transformation. Employees greeted him by name. Some paused to talk with him, asking about his day, expressing appreciation for his work. These weren't grand gestures, but they were sincere. And sincerity was something he had never expected but deeply appreciated. Even the guards approached him respectfully, offering nods or brief acknowledgments that carried more weight than words. In the broader atmosphere of the building, a subtle but undeniable shift took hold. People became more aware of one another, more thoughtful, more human. The confrontation had been uncomfortable, even painful, but the redemption that followed carried a lasting impact. It became a quiet story shared in passing, a reference point during training sessions, a moment people thought about when considering how they treated others. It echoed not because of the conflict itself, but because of the humanity that emerged from it. The janitor, moving through his routine, didn't seek praise or attention. He simply continued doing his work, now with a sense of belonging that hadn't been there before. And though he would never say it aloud, he felt something settle inside him. A restoration of dignity, a reaffirmation of worth, a reminder that even the quietest workers can inspire change simply by being who they are. If this story pulled you in, then you're exactly the kind of viewer who belongs here. On this channel, every narrative is built to make you feel something: tension, empathy, justice, and the spark that makes you want to see what happens next. So don't just watch, be part of the community. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next story that will leave you thinking long after it ends. Turn on notifications because the moment a new chapter drops, you'll want to be among the first to experience it. Tap like to push this story into the feeds of others who need to see it. Drop a comment, share the moment that struck you, the character you connected with, or the twist you didn't see coming. Your voice doesn't just add conversation, it shapes what comes next. Share this video with someone who loves gripping, character-driven storytelling as much as you do. One click from you could pull someone else right into this world. This channel grows because of you, your reactions, your insights, your support. Every bit of it helps turn these stories into a living universe we build together. So stay with us. The next story is already on its way.